The Death and Trial of Socrates. To try and understand a broken object, a person must first try and understand the reason it was created, or at the very least what purpose it served. The same can be said about people. The Death of Socrates questions why he died and how he got to that point. The easiest way to understand why someone has done something is in knowing their way of life and what shaped their thinking. Plato tells us that Socrates was 70 years old or a little more at the time of his death, which is around the year 399 BC. He was the son of Sophronicus and Phaedra, growing up with the same basic beliefs and rules as any other member of his society. In his youth, he became a fully armed hoplite, which was a central focus of warfare in ancient Greece. They were a citizen milita, and so were armed as spearmen, and assumed a phalanx formation. They were primarily drawn from the middle class who could afford the cost of armaments. This implies that Socrates' family was well off, or at least enough to provide a good position in the military, and he had a very monetarily stable childhood. From all accounts, he was a good fighter and well respected from his time in the military, but after serving, he began studying quite vigorously. In his early 20s, he began turning away from the cosmological speculations of the Ionians in favor of man. He started with studying both East and West philosophies, including works by Archelaus, Diogenes of Apollonia, and Empedocles. Perplexed by the disagreement of the various philosophical theories, Socrates received a sudden light from the passage where Xenarus spoke of mind being the cause of all natural law and order. What he found was that Xenarus introduced mind merely to get the vortex movement going. This disappointed Socrates and set him on his own line of investigation, abandoning the natural philosophy which seemed to lead nowhere, save to confusion and opposite opinions. This caused him to truly open his mind and begin to really question. After many studies, Socrates became a teacher to anyone willing to learn to reason and question not only their surroundings, but themselves as well. When he first started out, he refused to take any paying pupils, feeling that it would be wrong, but Socrates seemed to change when he started teaching. There is some discrepancy on what Socrates' teachings really were. Xenophon viewed him as a man whose main interest was to make people better. Plato, however, shows Socrates as a metaphysician of the highest order and not reducing himself to answer the questions of daily life. Both could be correct. Just as friends today may only talk about certain subjects with particular friends, is it unreasonable to believe it happened then too? Seraphon, a devoted friend of Socrates, asked the oracle of Delphi if there was any man living who was wiser than Socrates, and received the answer no. Socrates didn't believe the answer, and so he went around questioning many different peoples in all different walks of life, and found that, truly, he actually was the wisest man. With the division of ideas between his friends and peers, it is difficult to really grasp what Socrates believed and what others claimed he believed. Plato has been accused in more recent times of claiming his ideas or beliefs as Socrates. We get the best documentation of what Socrates was really like from his trial and death. Those events were slightly more detailed in record, and it's the one time that people can really see Socrates as a man. It shows his sense of humor and his open-mindedness for people's opinions, not to mention his loyalty to society and its laws. Socrates' trial was brought about in the year 400 BC by Antis, who was the politician who quietly instigated the whole affair with Miletus as the prosecutor of the tribe. Socrates was charged with two different things, the first of which was never really elaborated upon, and the second which was taken quite seriously. Socrates is guilty of 1. Not worshipping the gods from whom the state worships, but introducing new and unfamiliar religious practices, and 2. Further of corrupting the youth. The opening arguments were sincere and convincing to begin with. Miletus used the excuse of corrupting the young in the meaning of twisting the youth's minds against the government. It was the fear of what may be called philosophical radicalism, which promoted the action of Miletus, Antis, and Lycon. The result did not disappoint their expectations. The friends of Socrates abandoned the struggle and retired into exile eventually. And when they returned to Athens, the most prominent of them, Plato, was careful to confine himself to theory and to announce in emphatic terms his withdrawal from the practical politics of his native city. Socrates' friends, however, did attempt to help Socrates any way they could before his death, but his morals wouldn't support escape. After his trial, Socrates was accused of two things, and like the trials of today, he was allowed to speak at the start. His opening remarks were, "How you, O Athens, have been affected by my accusers, I cannot tell. But I know that they almost made me forget who I was, so persuasively did they speak." and yet they have hardly uttered a word of truth. But of the many falsehoods told by them, there was one which quite amazed me. I mean, when they said that you should be upon your guard and not allow yourselves to be deceived by the force of my eloquence. To say this, when they were certain to be detected as soon as I opened my lips, and proved myself to be anything but a great speaker, did indeed appear to be most shameless, unless by the force of eloquence they mean the force of truth. For if such their meaning, I admit that I am eloquent, but how different a way from theirs. This would have caused a debate among the people gathered, for the simple honesty of his speech would have been far superior to that of Miletus. It was a good argument, and was enough to sway some of the people in the court's decision, but not everybody. Plato's apology gives the substance of the defense made by Socrates at his trial. It was a bold vindication of his whole life. He was condemned to die, although the vote was carried by only a small majority. When, according to Athenian legal practice, Socrates made an ironic counter-proposition to the court's death sentence, proposing to only pay a small fine, because of his value to the state as a man with a philosophical mission, the jury was so angered by this offer that it voted to increase the majority for the death penalty. To put it bluntly, I've been assigned to the city as if to a large horse which is inclined to be lazy and is in need of some great stinging fly, and all day long I'll never cease to settle here, there, everywhere, rousing and reproving every one of you. These comments were not met with approving opinions of the court, and Socrates' death was ordered. The execution was set for a much later date due to a celebration that was being prepared for. This allowed Socrates time for a chance to escape, but he never took it. Socrates held the moral value that he had lived by the community's teachings, and he would die by their law. This caused many concerns and arguments with his students and friends, but he held true to his word. This further shows Socrates switched from a study of science in his earlier years to one of a more ethical nature. During his imprisonment, many of Socrates' friends and students came to speak with him. Some tried to help him escape, and others tried to understand why he did what he did. Socrates conversed with his friends and fellow philosophers. The common way to die in his time was deadly hemlock. Poison hemlock has been used as a sedative and for its antispasmodic properties. It was also used by Greek and Persian physicians for a variety of problems such as arthritis. However, it wasn't always effective, as the difference between a therapeutic and a toxic amount is very slight. Overdoses can produce paralysis and loss of speech, being followed by depression of the respiratory function and then death, a very grim way to die. Socrates would have drunk a very potent solution of the plant, causing death to come faster than it would if not concentrated. As he lay dying, Socrates spoke of as if nothing were out of the ordinary. Plato's writing shows just how calm and collected Socrates was at the time of his death. For me, the fated hour calls. In other words, I think it's about time I took my bath. I prefer to before drinking the poison, rather than give the women the bother of washing me when I'm dead. His final request was to ask a friend to sacrifice a cock to Hespes, the god of healing, as a way of thanking him for being delivered from the painful disease of life. It's rather odd that Socrates calls life painful when the death that he was about to go through was extremely painful as well. By his acceptance of death for what he believed, Socrates became one of the many martyrs of the world. He may not be as well known as some, but very few people had the strength of will or character to be able to go through what they say they will. His actions caused a bit of a stir and have made many people through time go back and try and understand his life. Even with his comments, it's better to put him to death because he wouldn't live much longer anyways. Socrates seems more reasonable. He had a very rational view of the world to some respect, and that is probably why he didn't believe his friend right about what the oracle had said. His actions and rationale show a different side of him than what he was like at the trial. Simply by following through with what the court decided proved their accusations wrong of the first grievance that they had brought against him. The community's will was that of the gods, and for Socrates to follow their will was to not disrespect the gods. He said what he believed and followed through with his actions, which is always praiseworthy. His actions for the last days of his life could even be compared to Nietzsche's idea of fatalism. From circumstance, Socrates was fated to raise those questions that would cause his downfall. Nietzsche's belief that we are free and have free will, but are not free at all. If this is to be believed, Socrates didn't cause his death any more than Miletus did. Either way, Socrates showed remarkable insight, humor, and honesty throughout his trial. He felt that ethics were an important part of life in a community, but could they ever be changed, even by the death of a good man?